Sounds a lot to me like this concept of human flourishing, right? Yeah, so creation care facilitates that human flourishing.
It's fundamental.
Right, yeah, so I think that's kind of like what we call like part of the holistic gospel, holistic evangelism.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think this conversation of creation care at least arose to me only quite recently. I haven't really been exposed to it prior to being in university.
Okay.
You know, it used to be just like it's a science thing, you know, like the Bible doesn't have anything to say. I didn't really know about this until I entered university and I was exposed to some friends who were very interested in it, you know. Yeah, and then turns out you also wrote a book about it. Yeah, so actually my question then would be, why hasn't this conversation like existed for longer, you know? Like, why is it only recently that we start talking about it?
I don't know whether it is only that we have recently started talking about it. I mean, one of the things is to look at church history, right? And to consider when did this whole idea or when did this thought of creation care begin? And from my reading, right, it has always been there, right? So maybe they didn't use these terms, creation care, earthkeeping, but the consideration of creation and the recognition that God reveals himself within the created order, the appreciation of beauty, right, the remarking at mystery, right, the just marveling, right, at God's grandeur has always been there in the church tradition, right? And in fact, what I've come to see is that the contemporary discourse on how Christians are the cause of ecological problems, right? And because of our understanding of dominion, we've resulted in terrible things happening to the created order. That's actually a fairly contemporary discourse. Because if you look back at the history of the church, of course, we have had many times where we have failed miserably to do good things, right? But there have been serious concern by missionaries in either protecting indigenous people's rights to the land, right, or in helping people to have sustainable farming practices, or even in preserving biodiversity because, you know, it's part of our ecological responsibility. It's how they understand the Genesis Commission, right? That has always been part of church tradition. I think what happened in the late 19th century, early 20th century, is that the concept of mission took a slightly different turn. And I may be wrong, so perhaps you shouldn't quote me on this, and whoever's listening should probably do more research, right? But I think what happened is that the idea of mission began to be, or salvation began to be seen in more individualistic terms, right? There was and I'm talking about the West, by the way, so this again is church history that's very biased, right? Because it's not even considering Asian, South African, blah, 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 right? So especially in America, right, it began to be more individualistic, more concerned with just what is good for me. And so a lot of these themes, right, our connectedness with creation, our connectedness with human beings, it then took a back seat. And you also have to understand this, I suppose, in the context of world history, right, where there were world wars happening. So I guess people's thoughts began to be more of what's after this life on earth, rather than how do I live within this reality. Yeah.
All right, so we talked a bit about why creation care does not it has not been part of the wider church discourse, you know. But perhaps we can explore a bit more about why is it not intuitive for us to consider God's creation, you know, in our daily lives.
Yeah, it's interesting that you ask this question, because when I was thinking about it, it felt strange to me that it should be intuitive, you know, because if it's part of who we are to be, right, our fundamental identity, being made in the image of God as God's gardeners, right, then it should be intuitive to care. So why do we not care? Or why, when we receive these messages of caring for creation, it's what's this mean? I think part of it is, in Singapore, right, at least, is our disconnect from the land is our disconnect from the created world. So how does this look like, right? Like when I do creation care workshops, one of the things that I tend to do is to ask people to draw a food map. So take chicken rice, right? Now, we love chicken rice. Most of us do anyway. Some of us prefer duck rice, but you have chicken rice, right? And you have all these things on the plate. But where does everything come from? Right? Where does your chicken come from? Who cooks your chicken? Who slaughters your chicken? Who processes your chicken and brings it in from wherever it came from to Malaysia to end up on a plate? Right? We don't think about it. The chili that goes with the chicken rice, who made the chili sauce, right? How did the chili sauce come from a chili plant, and where did the chili plant come from, and who, like, you know, there's just a whole host of relationships that went into making a plate of chicken rice or a bowl of laksa or basically any food that we would eat, right? But what do? When we want to eat chicken rice, we would just go to the hawker center and order chicken rice, consume it, and then not think anything about it except for, was it good chicken rice or was it bad chicken rice, right? So I think we are quite disconnected from the kind of food we eat, for example. We're quite disconnected from the clothes that we wear, like who made it, right? Where did the cotton come from? Or what's the material? We don't even think about it. We just think about, does it look nice on me, right? And so that disconnect from the created world, that lack of relationship with the goods that have gone into what, like making us who we are, right? Because we need to eat, we need to drink water, we need to breathe air, we need to wear clothes, right? These things, we don't think about it, and we have, and so that causes kind of a disconnect, right? And that makes it not intuitive because we don't know, right? I think another thing is, we were talking about this, like just how in Singapore we're very busy, right? And we're so tired all the time. And so we're basically going from one appointment to another, or maybe now from one Zoom meeting to another, right? So we're not really paying attention to what's around us. When we see a tree or a plant, we're like, oh, there's a green thing there, if we even notice a green thing there. When we hear a bird, we don't think, oh, what kind of bird it is. We just think, oh, that's the ooh bird that just wakes me up in the morning, right? We don't really pay attention to the created world. And that's partly because we're busy, partly because we don't care, partly because we're tired. And I think sometimes it's because we're afraid. We're afraid of inconvenience. We are afraid of what kind of sacrifice it would take for us to cultivate a relationship with another being, right? But one of the first tasks that Adam had, right, was to name the created world. And that naming does something. It allows you to cultivate a relationship so that you're not seeing the created world just as things for you to use, right? But you recognize in some way, in some profound mystery, the sacrifice that goes into allowing us to be human, right? And I think that's something we need to recover, right? Part of it is also needing to recover how caring for creation is not just task and responsibility, but it is an act of worship. It's an act of adoration to the Creator God. Yeah, I hope that answers your question. I think I kind of meandered all over the place, but yeah.
You landed, I think on a really critical note, that admiring God's creation allows us, or even like helps us worship God, right? Being in awe rather than being distracted, you know, like from and trying to do our own thing, not even noticing the green thing there, right? Yeah. So we talk a bit about how we don't notice the sources of our food. We don't notice the sources of like the chili sauce, the chicken, even the rice, you know.
Yeah.
It actually takes quite a lot of work mentally to think about these things. And I think that generally it takes a high level of conscientiousness, which can be tiring, which is why it's not intuitive to us. Yeah, so actually that's really insightful. Yeah, for us, basically we need to slow down, contemplate, and basically consider, right, where what we use comes from.
Yeah.